Welcome everyone to the August 2021 MemLab Network webinar. And today is going to be more of a just chat with our DC Public Library MemLab librarian, Robert LaRose, who has joined me here today. Thank you so much, Robert, for being with us and for giving us these updates on DC Public Library's MemLab.
So hello everyone. As Siobhan mentioned, my name is Robert. You may have seen me before at one of the network training events here in DC. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the MemLab used to be, what it is now, and how that's the same, how they're different. So the MemLab used to be at the Northeast branch of DC Public Library, which is on Capitol Hill. And that's where it was for the past 3 years, basically, while the Central Library, the MLK Library, was being renovated. So last summer, actually almost a year ago now, in September of 2020, the MLK Library reopened after that renovation project was over, and we now have the lab back here at MLK. The lab actually did not open when the full library opened last year. We decided to start taking appointments in the lab just this summer. A couple months ago, towards the end of June. So the lab has been, after a 1.5 year hiatus, the lab has been open about 2 months now. And it's probably been the busiest that it's ever been, just in terms of traffic, people coming and booking appointments and using the lab. So in the past couple months, I ran a report through our scheduling system, and it looks like we had about 48 appointments in the past 2 months, which is amazing. This could be due to a number of different factors. Maybe people are at home more, they have the option to telework more, a little bit more free time, that kind of thing. So the difference, there are a few differences between how it was at the branch and how it is here. So at the branch, we had 2 separate stations. One side for anything having to do with AV, so VHS tapes, audio cassettes, that kind of thing, and a separate station for scanning, photographs, slides, negatives. Now, due to the way our space is laid out, the way the room is that the lab is located in, we can only have 1 station. So when you book a session at the lab, you have access to both the scanner as well as the AV equipment. So that's one difference. You know, it's better for people if they have multiple formats, because then they can scan while they're transferring a video. But that means that we can't accommodate as many people in each appointment slot. So what else did I want to mention that is different? At the branch, we used to have it where, because the lab was located in, kind of lumped in with our public computer area, we couldn't fully supervise it all the time. So there were certain pieces of equipment like adapters for cables for certain formats, like audio cassettes or mini DV specifically, that people had to request from us at the reference desk. Now we don't have to do that. We can just have everything set up already You don't have to request anything from the desk. So it's a lot more seamless, I guess, checking people in for appointments. And speaking of appointments, I want to show you what our scheduling software looks like, both from the back end, the staff end, and also from the public end. So the program that we use is called Acuity. So this is what our scheduling page looks like from the public view. And this is what the labs has been using, I think, since the beginning, so about 5 years or so. And the Memory Lab is actually just one component of the labs department at DCPL. So in addition to the Memory Lab, we also have a makerspace called the Fabrication Lab, and also audio and video production spaces called the studios. So this site is used for scheduling appointments in any of those spaces. So to make a Memory Lab appointment, you would come down here and you see we have each lab separated out. So you click on your space, it lists all of the formats that you could potentially transfer here, and then you can pick any of these bold dates and times, and then put in your information from there. So this is what that looks like. You know, put in your contact information, and then the nice thing about Acuity is that all of these forms, these intake forms for each of the different labs, are totally customizable. So you can put in any question, any statement in here that you want. So if you are having trouble with scheduling, or maybe you're looking for a different system for scheduling your appointments, I highly recommend Acuity. It's not free. I think our subscription is about $19 a month, somewhere around there. So it's a very powerful system, very powerful tool. So if you're looking for a different solution for scheduling, this would definitely be the way to go. And this is what the back end looks like. So we have all of these different appointment types here, and you can actually make different calendars. You see each one of these Fabrication Lab 3D printers, for the laser cutters, for the sewing machines, and then over here is our Memory Lab appointments. So you can really separate things out very easily, and it's just a really intuitive interface. And then you can also make reminder emails, things like that, that automatically go out at a certain time before someone's appointment. So I think I'm gonna stop sharing now. And so I talked about the changes in the space, our appointment scheduling. Another big benefit of having the lab here at MLK is that previously, when it was at the branch, we only had one person doing orientations and sort of helping people with their appointments. Now, because we have the whole labs department here responsible for helping people in the Memory Lab, we have the burden of doing orientations and training people spread across 8 different staff members, which is it's just so great. Um, and the other thing I wanted to mention about appointments was previously, before COVID, we used to have group orientation sessions. So a couple times a week, we would have up to 4 people could sign up for any orientation session, and it would just be kind of like a group training separate from any transfer appointment. Now, all of our orientations are one-on-one. So whenever someone comes in, if it's their first appointment in the lab, they get an orientation at the start of the appointment. So that's another difference. In terms of when we are offering appointments, it's basically for the whole time that the library is open. So our current hours since roughly June have been Monday through Saturday from 10 to 6, except on Thursdays we're open 12 to 8. So just shifted by 2 hours. And we offer appointments Monday through Friday, usually 2 slots a day, a morning slot and an afternoon slot, except Thursdays, which we only have the 1 afternoon slot. And that is mostly due to staffing. The evenings and weekends are usually much less in terms of available staff. So we haven't expanded the hours to evenings and weekends yet, but that is something that we're looking at. In terms of the equipment that we have here, it's basically the same as what we had in the interim location at the branch. We are looking to purchase a replacement scanner, but because currently we have the Epson Expression 11,000 XL, which there is a newer model out, the 12,000 XL, but we have not been able to acquire that yet because it is currently out of stock. And it's been that way for most of this year. So that's been a challenge with replacing that. But everything else.
A challenge for the network too.
Yeah.
So thanks for that heads up.
And it could actually also be because of the that DC government has to purchase from. We are limited in terms of who we can purchases with. So at least on B&H photo and video, it has been out of stock basically for most of the year. Maybe with different vendors. I don't know if it's a vendor issue or an Epson manufacturing issue, but either way, we just haven't been able to get it. So maybe if you have different spending privileges or setups at your institutions, you might have better time of finding it, but that's a challenge that we've been facing lately.
Yeah, I think some of our partners can purchase from Amazon, and if you can do that, then that's what we would suggest, or somewhere else. But we can try and work on that. But I think there's not many options out there, really.
Yeah. See, we can't purchase from Amazon, so that that is certainly a challenge in some cases. But yeah. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is that, and this is something that we started doing before COVID, but I've just started getting back to doing this in recent months. So Dcpl has a podcast that we put out weekly episodes of, and they cover a wide different, very broad array of topics and are hosted by multiple different staff members. So we have a series about local DC history and culture, a series that highlights accessibility issues, which is actually one of our new additions. Someone from our accessibility department interviews people about disability rights and accessibility issues. So that is a new one. But, they cover a wide different, many different topics. One of those shows that we have on the podcast is called Memories on Tap, and it serves to highlight people who use our memory lab and sort of let them talk about their experiences using the lab and the effect that digitizing their collections or their family's collections have had on their lives as well as their relatives' lives. So recently, in the past year, I have started reaching out to past users of the lab to see if they would like to do these interviews. And I've gotten some pretty good responses. There have been, I think, 3 or 4 new shows since COVID, and I'm still continuing to meet up with people to record those. One of those interviews in particular that I want to mention was this woman who wrote a book after doing a cross-country bike tour. And the reason she did that bike tour was because she finished a 10-year battle with melanoma, skin cancer. And so basically, she actually did an author talk with us here at the library that was separate from the podcast. But she, in the course of writing her book, she used the memory lab to digitize a lot of her old photos because the book was about more than just her bike tour. It was also about her father in a way because he also battled with skin cancer when she was a kid, and actually she lost her father to skin cancer as a child. So there was a lot of reaching back into the past, her childhood a little bit in the book. So we talked about that. It was just fascinating how she tied her childhood experiences with her father and remembering how her father dealt with the cancer, and then taking that and talking about her love of cycling and traveling, and how using the lab helped her ultimately share that story with other people. So, and I should also probably tell you where you can get those podcasts.
Yes, definitely. And I'll put a link in our Slack too. But that's awesome. I love I think it's if you guys don't have your own library podcast, and a lot of the libraries in the network don't have their own, labs department either, but let's say you don't have a podcast, sure, but just use, whatever means you have of like interacting with the users of your lab and getting these. While we want those numbers of like how many appointments are we having every month, how many appointments are we not, what format are people doing, and things like that. We want those numbers, but it's just really a great reminder to get those other types of documentation of how the lab has impacted community through users, words and experiences. Yeah, so that's super cool.
The impact stories is a big help.
Exactly.
And even, even if we have a separate podcast web hosting. It's more than a web hosting platform. It also, it's kind of like an aggregator service. It publishes our podcasts or makes them available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the usual podcast platforms. But even if you don't have the ability to do that, you could make a free SoundCloud account, because SoundCloud allows you to embed things on a website. So you could just put them up on your library's website. You know, another low-cost option.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few out there, low to no cost. You can even put them on, I mean, as long as you can record these like through Audacity, the free software, and then potentially the Internet Archive too. You can just put that up because you can embed those too. I don't know. It's probably a little clunkier, but
maybe. But yeah,
free. Yeah.
So I'm just gonna share again and show you what the podcast webpage looks like. All right. So this is it. The URL is dcplpodcast.simplecast.com, and Simplecast is the service that we pay for, that both hosts them on this site as well as putting them on those podcast apps as well. Now, I should also note, so here's actually the latest one I did, this episode here. I talked with a reporter for WAMU who wanted to start digitizing his family's stuff after realizing that all of the stuff that they were keeping in a storage unit was almost destroyed because the storage unit was leaking, and there was potential water damage. Luckily, nothing got destroyed, I don't think. Or if there was anything, it was a very minimal amount. But basically, that was his catalyst for coming into the lab and starting to digitize stuff. But yeah, so that's it.
That's great.
Once again, you can get to it either on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or by going to dcplpodcast.simplecast.com. Oh, actually, another thing about the podcast. When I started doing it, I had never done a podcast before. I had never really done any kind of oral history interview, but there are, as I'm sure many of you know, there are a lot of great resources from the Library of Congress, and also, what is that project that they did?
The preserve your podcast, or?
Well, yeah, that too. But I think there's a project by the Library of Congress specifically about doing oral histories, and I'm for some reason I'm blanking on the name right now, but you can find a lot of great resources in terms of figuring out how to structure your interview, what questions to ask. But the way I like to think of it, just boil it down simply, is you're basically asking the person to talk about themselves a little bit, what they digitized, what they learned from that process, and then what they're doing with all of their stuff now, or what they plan to do with it. So that's a good way to break it down if you do decide to start doing these kinds of interviews with your lab users.
Yeah, and I could also see, even if you get people that, users that don't want to be recorded, you can also just ask people if you can chat and like record them over Zoom or something, just to like, so that way you can like write down what they say later and you can just kind of engage with them more when you're, talking with them. And then just, you can, write down what they say and use those quotes for like grant writing purposes, going back up to your administration to say, yes, we need this amount of money to be, or staff or resources to be directed to our memory lab this year, because here's, examples of how it's impacted people. So I think it's, it's until you have that like, oh no, this grant deadline is due in 2 weeks, just having this stuff in your tool belt for sustaining your lab is really great, and an important thing to plan for. So
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I don't think I had anything else to mention, but
cool.
Are there any questions that you had, Siobhan, that maybe I could?
Yeah, I feel like there's probably some things of as a point of just clarification too, because I've only really seen the new setup of the lab a little while ago. It was like a year ago now, when it was right after it was moved, a little less then, but mostly a year ago. Okay, so you're saying that like people can do both, like use the scanner for their negatives and things and transfer video at the same time? Would we just give them like a laptop? Because I thought there was only one Mac computer in there. And, I feel like, yeah, you can only do one at a time, but could we like give them a laptop to use because the scanner doesn't need, it just needs to have the software, right? Like,
That's definitely an option that I haven't considered yet, but it's a good idea.
okay.
Yeah.
But not a lot of people are really coming in asking for that, is the.
The majority aren't using both simultaneously. And I mean, the computer has enough processing power to do both at the same time.
Okay.
We did have someone who was very persistent, who wanted to record. What did he want to do? He wanted to transfer VHS and record an audio cassette, and I think mini DV all at the same time. And we said that is going to be a real strain on the computer.
Yeah.
That we wouldn't recommend that, because you might get dropped frames in the video. You might get inconsistencies in the audio stream. Something's got to give.
Mm-hmm.
You're overloading it with that much to do. You might miss some things in your transfer, but he did it anyway.
No, and it worked.
It worked enough for him, I guess.
Yeah.
It's not something we recommend.
Yeah, absolutely.
Doing one AV format with scanning is probably going to be fine.
Yeah. I mean, the scanner itself it doesn't require a lot. That's why a laptop would be fine to also do. But yeah, the only thing I can think of that I've had problems is when I try, and if I'm moving files from like my, from my desktop or computer to an external hard drive, which happens every day at the lab. And then if I'm trying to do something else with the computer that requires a lot of the computer, I have had it corrupt the files, or at least flip some bits there, and then you might not know until, if you don't check your files, which I'm not, we don't really tell people to do that or anything. Which I think we could probably do a little bit more on, but also this is a problem we were talking about the other day about fixity and how do we, make sure that people, this is the only copy of these files right now. Obviously, when they get home, they're going to make 3 and store them in 2 different geographic locations and all that. But yeah, that's the only thing I would think of, is just if people really wanted to do that, just be like, just if you're transferring files, how about that'll be the only thing that you do, or just check them when they're, make sure that it sounds exactly the same as the original files.
Yeah. That's happened to me before, actually, just like we were talking about.
Yeah.
When, you don't want a lot of background processes running, or foreground processes running, competing with processing power while you're copying stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've actually thought about maybe putting something about checksums, like adding another page about that on the LibGuide.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And the other thing, we are having a guest from the Computer History Museum in September, in about a month. And they're going to be talking about migrating files, and both from like physical formats to other formats, but then also migrating like a MOV to an MP4 sort of thing, or an MKV, like, and part of that is going to be like talking about fixity too. So just FYI, and just letting people know that that'll actually be our last Memory Lab Network webinar for this round. But yeah, hopefully there'll be some resources and maybe way of saying things that'll come out of that could be helpful for that. Because yeah, it's about not trying to overwhelm folks with that info, because it is actually pretty easy to create an MD5 checksum for a file.
Yeah,
and to check it. It's just that I just worry that it'll scare people because it uses the like computer terminal, like that will like make people just want to run away. But it is actually very easy, and you don't need to know anything other than what we tell you to do, Yeah,
if you've never used the command prompt or terminal or done any programming, coding, whatever, it's still pretty accessible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we could help a lot of people do that if we put those step-by-step instructions.
Yeah, that's actually, and another thing I've been, and something I thought of when you were talking before, but is like, I love how we have everything written out in the LibGuide. And this is also like all the documentation I'm making for the network too. It's all like written out step by step. There's screenshots sometimes too, and super helpful. But then, where do maybe a video too would be helpful. But that was one thing I was thinking about for the orientation. I'd love to maybe we could just sit a little more and talk about the orientation, because that's new anyway, where, you might have started doing this before the pandemic, which is what closed down the Northeast Memory Lab early. It was going to be moved anyway, but that closed it down early. When did we start requiring the orientation for users? I felt like that was a recent thing.
We did require it. Well, I started requiring it before the shutdown, before the move to okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So that's not necessarily a new thing at this new area, but that is something to note that we used to do. And do you feel like it really helped? I won't put words in your mouth. How do you feel like it helped?
Yeah, no, it absolutely helps. Yeah, absolutely 100%.
Like, do you feel like it helped? I know at Northeast, it's like you said before, it was just one person working on the, and trying to do a million other things, because there's just one person on the reference desk that is, trying to deal with the lab users and deal with the other computer users and printers and other people just asking questions. So yeah, I guess it probably helped in that way because there's less questions.
Yes. But I think it definitely helps here too, because we get less confusion and less of asking, like people coming back to the desk here, asking for questions during the process.
So, and how long does it take now? Because I know before it was, you had a group orientation, 3 or 4 people, no more than 4, and it was an hour, right? How long?
How many formats were being discussed and
right,
how inquisitive people were.
And talkative, and yeah. So now how long? Because it's like we have 3-hour appointments. You're saying you do it at the beginning.
15 minutes maybe.
Yeah, because you are that is kind of nice. They're already in. They're setting up their, you're kind of helping them set up their process, and then they don't have to go away and then forget everything. And yeah.
The other nice thing, really, really, really nice thing, and actually I think at this point, I think we'll probably just, like, even without COVID, if there's ever a time that we won't be with it, but I think we'll probably just keep doing one-on-one orientations from here on out.
That's what I was going to ask. Okay, yeah.
There really isn't a point, for one thing, we have people coming, I mean, most of our users live in the district, in DC proper, but we do have people commuting a ways from the surrounding counties in Maryland and Virginia.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's kind of a hike for them to get here. So they don't have to come a whole separate time just for the orientation.
Mm-hmm.
And also I can basically make them do it themselves. Like I give verbal instructions, but they're doing everything themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's much more, it gets ingrained in their brains more than just a spoken class,
Absolutely.
You're not actually doing it yourself.
Yeah, because when there's 4 other people there and they're all just kind of standing and watching you do it. Yeah.
They can't, it would have to be like 2 hours if I had everybody do it themselves in that group class.
Yeah, so this definitely seems like a time saver, or it just seems more efficient. It might add up to be the same amount of time, maybe if it's like 4 people, 15 minutes, that's 2, but it definitely seems to be more efficient and probably make users more happy.
I think so.
Yeah, cool. That's cool. I'm trying to think of any other questions that I have. I think those were the big ones and also I feel like you said this the other day when we were talking, but you were saying that I know that when the lab was open, like before you and I think were at DCPL, when it first opened at MLK, before the renovation, before the move to Northeast, I think the numbers were really high, of course, of users coming in. Of course, it was also like this new fancy thing that a new idea too, like anywhere. But so that might have petered out anyway. But it's one of those things where it's like, it moved to Northeast. And I remember looking at the numbers and they just dropped a lot, which is to be expected for a library, a neighborhood branch rather than a central branch. But then the fact I am really pleasantly surprised that the numbers have just been up there the last 2 months. And like you said, it could just be because, we're just reopening and people are excited about that. But also I would think it wouldn't be because we're still in the middle of a pandemic. It's not like that's going away. I know that this wasn't, the plan was going to be this anyway, but it seems to be working out for the pandemic, and I think probably people will be planning for this anyway in the future, the one computer, one station, because it's in its own little room, which we'll see in a little bit. You'll give us a little quick tour. But yeah, it's its own room. So one person in there, you know, maybe you're in there showing them with the door open for a few minutes, but then everyone's wearing masks, you know, like I just foresee that in the future being probably a better idea.
Yeah, yeah, and that is the main reason that we set it up that way now is because of the pandemic, but the size of the room, it would just get, like if we, you know, you have two separate tables set up, one for the AV, one for the scanning station, it would be so, I mean, you'd basically feel like you were right up on the other person.
Yeah, and that's just never going to be something I think we're going to ever want to be doing again, you know, at least me. Yeah. Yeah.
So it just makes sense to have it. Now, even with that single station, there is still kind of a lot of empty space in there that we're trying to figure out what to do with. But it does give people space to kind of feel comfortable and
good
on their project. Certainly a lot more privacy than where it was at Northeast, because like I said, it was right there with the public computers. And if you had anything playing on the monitor, as soon as whoever walks into that public computer area, you can see whatever is playing on the monitor.
Yeah, it was very obvious. And like, it kind of grabbed your eye too. You're like, what's that? Yeah, yeah.
It's higher than all of the other screens, very prominent, this big towering black cabinet with equipment. Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually stopped encouraging people to use the monitor when it was, because you can see it, you can monitor it anyway in the software.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. And like, yeah, those, I mean, it's good to use, I feel like it's good to get that CRT running every now and again, you know, just to keep it going and well oiled, but so to speak. But yeah.
To hear the beautiful sound of it turning on.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. It is a nice warm sound. And like, but then, yeah, that's sort of like where if it's just like, okay, everything's going well, I've got a 2-hour tape, I'm just going to turn that sucker off because, yeah, you don't want to wear it out. And yeah, it's just, it's there. I really just use them for troubleshooting. When things go wrong, then you can just see if it's the deck, blah, blah, blah. I've done a whole bunch of videos on that. But yeah, that makes sense. And also, it's nice to, if you have like people coming in like funders and things like that, it is nice to have that on to be like, look at all, you know, it's just a shiny thing that people seem to really enjoy. But then also, I've mentioned this before, if you have that on when users are digitizing stuff, they get mad. We've had people be like, why doesn't my image on the computer look as good as that? Why does it look so good there? And it's because that's the technology that this analog tape was meant to be played on. It wasn't meant to be turned into ones and zeros and viewed on a, you know, progressive screen monitor.
I always love telling people about that.
Yeah, so that's another thing to think about and have that answer ready for people if they're going to be watching it on there. Just say, oh, well, this is an analog piece of equipment, which this tape was made to be gloriously displayed on. Whereas, you know, we're still capturing all the information. We just can't have it look exactly like that because this is not a big bulky CRT. You know?
Yeah, the monitor, the computer monitor, is not optimized for analog, an analog signal.
That I love that. Just say that. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
that usually people are like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Not digital.
Yeah, great. What else do you feel like, what do you feel like are like people's biggest hurdles that users, what do you think that their biggest hurdle is, especially now? Do you feel like do you feel like the questions are still the same now?
Sort of. Really, I think the biggest hurdle and the biggest thing, yeah, the biggest hurdle to using the lab or doing their, projects, not even just like considering the digitization part, but the whole picture is being overwhelmed
Mm,
at how to organize things and prioritize things
yeah.
and use the time, especially with video or any tape that has to be played in real time, um, making the most of their appointment.
Mhm. Well, actually, that does lead me to another question, which is how do you feel about the 3-hour appointments? Because I feel like we have a few partners that are going to be offering 4-hour appointments.
I would say if you can make the 4 hours work staffing wise and yeah, staffing wise, do it.
Yeah, because I feel like in an 8-hour, if the library's open from 10 to 6, it's like there's really not too many, you wouldn't 10 to 6, but then yeah, staffing wise, you have to get someone in there at like 9:30, and like
Yeah, like if we did that now, we could only have one appointment a day.
yeah, yeah.
And we want to accommodate up to 2 people a day. Um, so, and it also, I mean, with the other lab spaces, our appointments are either 2 or 3 hours.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It does keep, um, it's just consistent with the rest of the
Yeah.
space.
Oh, and I feel like I lost a train of thought there somewhere of myself, where I was trying to ask you that you said, correct, that the lab is now like 1 month booked out, 1 month in advance.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's booked. Actually, Acuity, the scheduling software, only or the way we have it set, I think you can only book up to a month in advance.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But also, all of our, like 98% of our appointments for September are taken.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome.
And that's, weekday, daytime only.
Hmm.
Not even offering any evening or weekend when theoretically people would be more available.
That's a really good point.
So, and
Great.
most of the people that we have coming in here are still working
Hmm.
people.
Yeah.
Well, some of them, a lot of them are retirees and whatnot, or students maybe, but most of them are like, middle-aged working people.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. So then I guess that's another question of the like demographic exit survey, that I know that we had on a slip of paper before. And in light of the pandemic and everything, having everything physical is not a good idea. Having anything physical as little as possible is what you want. So you guys transitioned that into a Google form, is that right?
Yes, and I actually need to double check to make sure that it should be that that's being sent out with our follow-up email.
In that sense, it gets sent out through Acuity, right? It's like their appointment's over. Acuity just gets this like automatic thing that sends them an email saying, thanks for visiting, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it usually sends 24 hours after their appointment.
Gotcha.
I need to double check that, thank you for reminding me.
Of course, yeah.
I need to check that that's actually going out properly and that we're getting responses.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, just let me know, and if you have a link to it. You've probably already sent it to me, but if you could send that again, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll send that to you.
Because I know we haven't really, there's so much to do just in light of the fact that things are opening up again, hours probably going to be added soon to everyone, and staffing with everything. Everything's just really hard right now, and there's a lot going on for everyone in the library. So totally get that, like, we're just kind of chilling. Like, we've got the questionnaire going out, and then it's sort of like we'll have the information at least, and we can figure out what to do with it later. But that's it's one thing, to anecdotally have those, like, okay, yeah, it seems like it's mostly this or that type of folks coming in. But yeah, that kind of, and we have examples of the forms on the Memory Lab Network deep dive. So you can see what kind of questions you could ask and turn into your own form. But yeah, just kind of having that information to know maybe where to do more outreach towards folks that aren't, coming in, that's in your user base. Just, obviously information is power.
And identifying places to, maybe new places to do outreach events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Area, demographics that you're not capturing.
Mm-hmm. But yeah.
Do you want to see the space?
Yeah, that would be great.
This is the new Memory Lab. Let me see if I can get the view. So here we have the rack. This is the room. So you can see, not super big, but just enough. So we have the rack there, and then the scanner over here.
Great. And then, all your supplies and adapters and stuff are there, like you said.
So all of the adapters, if you can see, are plugged in all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, before we used to have to administer them at the reference desk.
Right.
So, yeah.
That's great. And there is like a window to look in, right? I mean, obviously it's like into the room, right?
Yeah, there's this window right here.
Gotcha. So it's private, but
it goes out. So this room is part of our audio video studios area.
Yeah.
There's kind of like that lobby
mm-hmm.
out there that all of the doors to the studios here open out onto that little lobby.
Gotcha. Yeah. That makes sense. Makes complete sense. Cool. Yeah, I see what you mean, where having another table in there isn't going to happen.
There.
Yeah.
The table ends there, but then we have this awkward amount of space there.
I could see like a shelf there or something, especially if we get additional equipment.
I thought maybe one of our users, actually the person that I just interviewed last week for the podcast, offered to donate a 8 and high 8 camcorder.
That's right.
And also a Wolverine 8mm transfer machine.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's the same. Okay.
Yeah, I thought about maybe putting that other table in here and having the Super 8 viewer
mm-hmm.
that you gave, and then maybe the Wolverine, and so that could be like a separate film transfer area.
Yeah, that's true. That would be cool.
And at least to start, we could just use a laptop for that, but we could probably get another Mac.
Yeah, and I'm going to be testing out some things for the grant soon, this fall. So then we'll have those, one of them is like one of the newer Mac minis. So that could be used for that. Yeah.
Would we use Black Magic still? Or
right. Yes. That I still, yeah, they're not making the no, I always get that mixed up. The shuttle, the studio shuttle or whatever it's called, the AD converter. But I have a workaround that I think that is still in our budget that I think will basically, it's just like there's a converter that converts it to SDI, and then we just need another converter that takes the SDI into Thunderbolt 3, I believe. Yeah. So I'm going to be testing that out to make sure before I start telling everyone to do that. But that is my plan.
Okay.
But it's still Black Magic, so it'd still be using that software potentially.
Cool.
Yeah.
Just, so that there was someone just in here. Who's in the lab, and I am deleting their.
Yeah.
That's another limitation. Not sure. Different library systems and institutions have different ways of dealing with public computer use, but I would imagine that some of you might have systems where as soon as someone logs off, anything that they saved on that machine gets wiped. We can't do that right now because the system that we use for that isn't really compatible with Macs. So we have to manually go in and delete people's stuff after their appointment.
Gotcha. Okay.
It's always been that way.
Yeah.
From before.
Yeah, because we've always had that Mac. Yeah. Or a Mac. Yeah. For the lab. Yeah. And that's another thing that is worth mentioning probably with the 3-hour appointment. I mean, this person, how often do you think it happens that somebody goes over their appointment because of a file?
Not very often.
Processing. Okay.
Yeah, this is the first time I think this month, or maybe
okay.
At the very least in the past few weeks. It's and in this case they just they underestimated how much material was on their tape. They were doing a DVD transfer. They underestimated how much material was on it.
Yeah.
And so they thought it was only going to be like 20 or 30 minutes, but it ended up being an hour and 45 minutes.
Oh yeah, that's slightly more. Yeah.
Yeah, just slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's why being very clear in the orientation about having that buffer time at the end for copying files or saving things to your hard drive or thumb drive or cloud storage, whatever you're using, that saving definitely takes up a considerable amount of time.
Yeah. Something, and that you definitely need to plan for. Yeah. Yeah. And that's also where it's just like with AV, with video, you don't know how much content is on there really until you put it in there. I mean, you can look at a tape and like, of course I just have a tape. You can look at a tape and just look at it and be like,
yeah.
Oh, this one doesn't
look different if it's recorded on or not.
Oh yeah, this says I think it says 15 on it. So that means that this is maximum 15 minutes. But yeah, there's also VHS tapes where it's like, if it was recorded in a slower speed, it could be 8 hours. So yeah, that's where I always am like, plan for 2 at least, especially for a memory lab. Plan for 2 hours of content. And
that's why, like you said, having that extending it to the appointment to 4 hours. If you have the time, if you have the staffing,
Hmm.
do it.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe that's
'Cause
later.
that allows for that buffer time for saving stuff and everything.
Hmm. And then are you getting a lot of people doing double booking? We don't have like
Not
an
too
issue
many.
with that, do we? We don't say no,
Yeah.
you can't do that.
No, we don't. But I haven't had too many double books
Okay. Yeah,
yet. Yeah.
cool.
Mhm.
Well, that's about everything I can think of. Thank you so much for sharing everything about how the lab is and showing us around.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm sure if you don't mind, I'll just continue putting your email out there for folks if they have specific questions about using the lab and teaching how to use the lab and things like that. Robert is absolutely the expert memory labber. So
Sure.
great. Awesome.
Happy to answer any questions that come along. All right.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.